Murphy-Jones rolled his F-105 into a 6G turn over the Red River Valley and watched a MiG-17 fly apart. The pieces tumbled through 32,000 feet of humid air and scattered across rice paddies northwest of Hanoi. Somewhere below, a North Vietnamese pilot, name unrecorded, hit the ground in a machine designed to kill exactly the kind of aircraft Jones flew. A nimble, Soviet-built interceptor against a bomb truck twice its weight. The MiG should have won. Every aerodynamic principle said so. Every performance chart confirmed it. The wreckage said otherwise. That afternoon in June of 1966, Jones landed at Takhli Royal Thai Air Force Base with gun camera footage that made the intelligence officers lean forward in their chairs. A Thunderchief, 50,000 pounds of nuclear delivery platform never designed for air combat, had outturned and gunned down one of the most agile fighters in the Soviet inventory. If you know someone who'd care about a story like that, a veteran, a history student, someone who builds model aircraft on their kitchen table, hit subscribe so you've got the next one ready to send. Drop a like. Leave a comment telling me what Cold War aircraft you want covered next. The kill itself took 11 seconds from first trigger pull to impact. Jones fired the M-61 Vulcan cannon in 2 bursts, the second one connecting with the MiG's wing root. According to the after-action report, the enemy pilot attempted a brake turn at low altitude and misjudged his energy state. He pulled too hard, bled too much speed, and Jones closed to within 800 feet. At that range, the Vulcan, 6 rotating barrels cycling at 6,000 rounds per minute, didn't miss. But the remarkable thing about Murphy-Jones's kill isn't how it ended. It's that it happened at all. The F-105 Thunderchief entered service in 1958 as a single-seat nuclear strike aircraft. Republic Aviation built it to do one thing: carry a single thermonuclear weapon at supersonic speed below Soviet radar, deliver it, and escape the blast radius before the fireball caught up. The entire airframe reflected that mission. Long, narrow fuselage optimized for speed in a straight line. Tiny wings with a wing loading that approached 80 pounds per square foot, nearly double what contemporary fighters carried. Internal bomb bay. Massive J-75 engine gulping fuel at rates that made logistics officers wince. Nobody at Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, Long Island, sat down at a drafting table and said, "This airplane will fight MiGs over Hanoi." Yet by 1966, Thunderchief pilots had begun doing precisely that, and winning often enough to make North Vietnamese and Soviet advisors reassess their assumptions about what the big American fighter bomber could do in a close-in engagement. The after-action reports from Hanoi use a word that keeps appearing in different translations of captured North Vietnamese tactical assessments: dangerous. Not fast or well-armed. Dangerous. Their word, not ours. The Thud. Every pilot called it the Thud, a nickname the aircraft earned through a combination of landing gear sounds and a dark joke about crash rates. Carried more ordnance into North Vietnam than any other aircraft during Rolling Thunder. 86,000 sorties between 1965 and 1968. 334 Thunderchiefs lost, roughly half the total production run. They also obscure something important. Amid all that bomb hauling, F-105 pilots recorded 27.5 confirmed air-to-air kills against MiG-17s and MiG-21s. A nuclear bomber built like a dart, fighting dogfights against purpose-built interceptors flown by pilots trained specifically to shoot it down. And the Thud kept coming back with gun camera film showing burning MiGs. So what made it work? The airplane had almost no agility by fighter standards, and Thud squadrons flew into the most heavily defended airspace on Earth, outnumbered and outgunned on every mission. The answer starts with the men who flew it and the way they adapted a rigid machine to a fluid war, plus a training philosophy that Soviet doctrine never quite managed to counter. Murphy-Jones understood something about his aircraft that the MiG-17 pilot banking in behind him did not. Speed and energy, properly managed, beat maneuverability every time. We designed it to outrun the blast of its own weapon. Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's chief designer, said that to a visiting Air Force delegation in 1955. he meant it literally. The F-105 needed to deliver a Mark 28 thermonuclear bomb from low altitude, pull up into a half-Cuban 8 maneuver, and put enough distance between itself and the detonation point to survive the shockwave. Everything about the airframe served that single requirement. The fuselage tapered to a needle. The air intake sat in the nose with a forward-swept lip that channeled airflow efficiently at Mach 1.1 on the deck, meaning treetop level. The wings, swept at 45 degrees, spanned only 34 feet 8 inches. For an aircraft weighing 27,500 pounds empty, those wings bordered on vestigial. Kartveli and his engineers at Farmingdale traded lift for speed the way a gambler trades caution for chips. They bet everything on going fast and going straight. The internal bomb bay tells the whole story. Republic built the Thud with a weapons bay designed around nuclear ordnance, a single large store carried internally to reduce drag during the supersonic dash to target. Conventional bombs didn't fit the same way. When Rolling Thunder demanded the F-105 carry 16 750-pound bombs on external pylons, the drag penalty transformed the aircraft into something Kartveli never intended. Fuel consumption jumped by roughly 40%. Combat radius shrank. The sleek nuclear penetrator now hauled more external stores than a World War II B-17, hanging them off wing stations and a centerline rack that turned the airframe into a flying hardware store. This irritates me more than it probably should. The sheer bureaucratic indifference of sending a Mach 2 nuclear striker to drop iron bombs at 400 knots through the densest air defense network outside Moscow. But the Air Force had Thuds, needed strike aircraft, and the math worked on paper. Tactical Air Command owned 533 F-105D models by 1964. No other single-seat aircraft in the inventory carried as much payload as FAR, so the Thud went to war carrying ordnance it wasn't shaped for, flying missions it wasn't conceived for, into defenses its designers never anticipated. The J-75P-19W engine produced 26,500 pounds of thrust in afterburner. Even laden with bombs, the Thud could exceed Mach 1 in a shallow dive, and that raw power gave pilots something no tactical manual had accounted for. Once the bombs came off, the F-105 transformed. Clean. It accelerated like nothing else in the theater. A MiG-21 could match its top speed. A MiG-17 could outturn it. Neither could stay with a Thud in a high-speed vertical extension, trading altitude for separation, then rolling back in with the Vulcan spinning up. The nuclear mission had given Thud pilots one thing the enemy couldn't match: energy management drilled into muscle memory through hundreds of hours practicing low-level penetration runs at supersonic speed. They understood velocity the way a surgeon understands anatomy, instinctively and completely, even under pressure. The sound hit first, a roar like fabric tearing, magnified 1,000 times, as 4 F-105s lit afterburners on the runway at Korat in the dark. 3:45 a.m. The ground crews felt it in their teeth. Then the noise moved, climbing southeast toward the tanker track, and the flight line went quiet enough to hear insects again. Those 4 pilots carried 12,000 pounds of bombs each, full external load. They also carried the M-61 Vulcan cannon with 1,029 rounds of 20mm ammunition, and every one of them expected to use it before breakfast. The helpless bomb truck myth comes from people who never talked to Thud drivers. It persists because the loss numbers look catastrophic in isolation. 334 airframes destroyed sounds like a turkey shoot. But the mission rate tells a different story. 86,000 sorties means each of those losses occurred once per every 257 combat flights. Thud pilots flew into the most sophisticated integrated air defense system ever constructed, dropped ordnance on target, fought MiGs on the way out, and came home at a rate that North Vietnamese planners found deeply frustrating. According to a captured tactical summary from the 921st Fighter Regiment at Noi Bai, American strike pilots refused to jettison ordnance and flee when engaged. The document called this behavior tactically irrational. It made perfect sense from the cockpit. Thud pilots developed what they called the pod formation. 4 aircraft flying in a tight, mutually supporting box that kept every pilot's 6 o'clock covered by a wingman's eyes. When MiGs attacked, the formation didn't scatter. It compressed. The trailing element broke into the threat while the lead pair continued to target, dropped bombs, then reversed to support. The whole thing took 90 seconds from MiG call to bombs away. Pilots rehearsed it until the radio calls shortened to single words. The F-4 Phantom crews didn't have a gun. Early model F-4s carried only AIM-7 Sparrow and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. Both required specific engagement parameters: minimum range, proper aspect angle, radar lock. In the swirling, low-altitude engagements over Route Pack 6, those parameters rarely materialized cleanly. Sparrow reliability hovered around 10% in combat conditions. The Sidewinder performed better, but demanded a tail chase geometry that MiG-17 pilots, trained specifically to deny it, avoided through hard turning into the attack. The Thud carried a weapon that didn't care about aspect angle or minimum range or radar lock. The Vulcan fired 100 rounds per second in a cone of destruction that reached out to 2,000 feet effectively. A 1-second burst put enough metal in the air to shred an aluminum airframe. Thud pilots squeezed the trigger and walked the pipper onto the target the way a man aims a garden hose. No tone required, no lock, no waiting. The Air Force spent billions developing missile-only fighters while the aircraft actually racking up MiG kills carried a weapon designed in 1949. The GAU-4, the Vulcan's official designation, weighed 275 pounds and cost roughly $12,000 per unit in 1965 money. Each Sparrow missile cost $125,000. The math alone should have settled the argument, but procurement rarely follows logic in wartime. Those 4 Thuds were still climbing out of Korat in the dark. They crossed into North Vietnamese airspace at 5:22 a.m., descending through scattered clouds at 540 knots. Lead pilot Major Bill Dalton, a 34-year-old from Abilene, Texas, heard the first SAM warning at 5:29. 30 seconds later, his wingman called MiGs high at their 2 o'clock. Dalton didn't jettison his bombs. He called the break, watched his number 3 and 4 swing into the MiGs, and pushed his nose down toward the target, the Yen Vien Rail Yard, 14 miles northeast of Hanoi. He released 12 750-pound bombs across 400 yards of track and rolling stock at 560 knots, pulled 5 Gs in the recovery, and rolled to find a MiG-17 crossing his nose at close range. 1.2 seconds of cannon fire. The MiG shed its left wing and fell. Dalton's flight landed at Korat with all 4 aircraft intact. Ordnance expended on target. 1 confirmed kill. The debrief lasted 40 minutes. Someone had brought donuts. The intelligence officer's tape recorder caught Dalton's summary of the engagement. Standard Tuesday. Noi Bai airfield sat 11 miles north of Hanoi, ringed by revetments cut from red laterite soil that smelled like wet iron after rain. The pilots of the 921st Fighter Regiment walked to their MiG-17s across packed earth, breathing kerosene fumes and morning humidity so thick it clung to flight suits like a second skin. They had a plan that looked elegant on the briefing board. Soviet advisors called it the high-low trap, a pair of MiG-21s above at 30,000 feet, forcing the American formation to look up, while 4 MiG-17s slashed in from below and behind at the bomb-laden Thuds. The 17s carried 3 30mm cannon each. One clean pass through a loaded strike flight could down 2 aircraft before the Americans registered the attack. Nguyen Van Bay, who already held 5 kills against American aircraft by mid-1967, reportedly told younger pilots the F-105 with bombs flew like a pregnant buffalo. The phrase stuck. It circulated through North Vietnamese fighter squadrons as shorthand for easy targeting. Sources conflict on whether Bay used those exact words or something coarser. The translation comes third-hand through a Soviet advisory report filed in October of that year. The confidence had evidence behind it. MiG-17s possessed a turn radius roughly 60% tighter than a clean Thud, and a bomb-laden Thud turned even wider. At 450 knots in a left-hand turn, The F-105 needed nearly 4,000 feet of sky to come around. The MiG needed 2,400. Vietnamese pilots trained to exploit that gap. Close fast from the rear quarter, fire inside 1,000 feet, brake hard before the wingman could react. We expected them to die or run. A former 921st Regiment pilot said that to Vietnamese aviation historian Istvan Tapertzer decades after the war. They did neither. What the high-low trap couldn't account for, what no briefing board captured, was the moment bombs came off the rails. A Thud shedding 9,000 pounds of ordnance in a single pickle, transformed from prey to predator in under 3 seconds. The nose dropped, the afterburner lit with a sound like a door slamming in a cathedral, and suddenly the pregnant Buffalo accelerated through 600 knots, while the MiG-17 behind it hit its airspeed limit at 700. The geometry reversed. Vietnamese pilots who pressed their attack past the bomb release point found themselves closing on an aircraft that could now out-accelerate and out-zoom anything in their inventory. Nguyen Dinh Phuc pressed his attack on April 19, 1967, over Xuan Mai. He closed to 800 feet behind a Thud that had just dropped its load. The Thud pilot, Captain Tom Hirsch, lit the afterburner and pulled into a chandelle. Phuc followed. His MiG-17 couldn't hold the climb rate. Hirsch rolled over the top and came down with the Vulcan firing. Phuc didn't come back. The Thud is not an air superiority fighter and will not be employed as one. That line appears in a Tactical Air Command planning document from 1963. Someone underlined it twice. By 1970, F-105 pilots had killed 27.5 MiGs in air-to-air combat. The half credit came from a shared kill with an F-4 on June 3, 1967. Both pilots fired simultaneously, and the review board split the difference rather than argue about whose rounds hit first. The name of the reviewing officer isn't recorded. Against those 27.5 kills, the Thud lost 22 of its own to MiG engagements. A positive kill ratio for a bomber, the F-4 Phantom, the dedicated air superiority platform, the aircraft specifically tasked with killing MiGs, managed a ratio of roughly 2.4 to 1 during Rolling Thunder. Respectable. But the Phantom carried a crew of 2, a powerful radar, and missiles designed for exactly this job. The Thud carried 1 pilot, a gun sight meant for ground targets, and a cannon bolted into the fuselage because nuclear delivery aircraft needed a strafing option for secondary targets. Republic Aviation in 1955 never intended this airframe for air combat. The air combat fighter designed itself, somewhere over Hanoi, in the hands of pilots who refused to fly like victims. The kill log reads like a progression of impossible events. Captain Jean Basel, cannon kill on a MiG-17, May 13, 1967, at 50 feet above the Red River. Major Roy Dickey, 2 MiG-17s in a single engagement, using the Vulcan both times, closing inside 500 feet on the second pass because his pipper drifted and he corrected by flying closer. The after-action report describes Dickey's closure rate as inadvisable. His word for it, apparently, involved more profanity. There's a detail from Takhli that belongs here, even though it leads nowhere useful. Ground crews at the 355th Tactical Fighter Wing painted small red stars below the canopy rail for confirmed MiG kills, standard practice. But they also painted a tiny golden buffalo next to each star. Nobody ordered this. No regulation covered it. The tradition started with a crew chief named, well, the records don't say. It spread to Korat within weeks. They fought us like fighter pilots. Colonel Toom, likely a composite figure in Vietnamese accounts, though the name appears in multiple sources, allegedly made this observation to Soviet advisor Yevgeny Pepelyayev during a tactical review in late 1967. The complaint carried weight. North Vietnamese doctrine assumed strike aircraft would prioritize survival over engagement. American Thud drivers prioritized neither. They prioritized the mission. And if a MiG stood between them and the target, the MiG became part of the mission. The last Thud MiG kill came on October 27, 1967. Captain William Eskew caught a MiG-21, not a 17, a 21, the faster and more modern interceptor, in a descending spiral north of Phuoc Airfield. He fired a 3-second burst from 1,200 feet. The MiG trailed white smoke, then black, then nothing at all. SQ landed with 63 rounds remaining. His gun camera footage ran 8 seconds. The intelligence officer at Takhli logged the kill, added it to the tally sheet taped to the briefing room wall, and moved on to the next sortie package. 27.5. From a bomber that someone underlined twice. Fort Worth, Texas, 1968. Inside the General Dynamics plant where the F-111 rolled off the production line, engineers bolted an M-61 Vulcan cannon into the aircraft's weapons bay. The gun weighed the same 275 pounds it always had. The decision to include it carried considerably more. Across the Air Force, the argument about guns versus missiles ended not with a study or a white paper, but with 27.5 data points scattered across the skies of Route Pack 6. The Navy reached the same conclusion through different arithmetic. Their F-4 crews came home from Rolling Thunder with a kill ratio so embarrassing it spawned the creation of Top Gun at Miramar. But the Thud's contribution cut deeper than training reform. It rewired the philosophy of what an American combat aircraft should be. The F-15 Eagle, which first flew in 1972, carried an internal M-61 from the earliest design phase. It was neither afterthought nor secondary weapon. The gun bay appears in McDonnell Douglas's initial proposal sketches, the ones dated before the contract award, before the first wind tunnel model, before anyone argued about radar cross-section or thrust-to-weight ratio. No American fighter will ever again depend solely on missiles. That directive circulated through the fighter mafia, the informal group of tacticians, including John Boyd and Pierre Sprey, who pushed for the lightweight fighter program that produced the F-16. Boyd had studied Thud engagements obsessively. He built his energy-maneuverability theory partly from gun camera footage shot over Hanoi by pilots flying an airframe designed to deliver nuclear weapons at treetop level. The Vietnamese adapted too. By late 1967, MiG-21 pilots abandoned the high-low trap against Thud formations and shifted to hit-and-run intercepts from above. A single supersonic pass, missiles away, then disengage before the Thuds could react. The tactic worked. It reduced their losses. But it also reduced their effectiveness, because a MiG-21 pilot pulling off after one pass couldn't circle back to confirm whether his missile had guided true. North Vietnamese kill claims from this period inflate dramatically compared to verified American losses. The 921st Regiment reported downing 11 F-105s in September 1967 alone. American records confirm 3. Somebody's arithmetic carried more wishful thinking than math. The Thud itself didn't survive the war in operational service. Attrition ground the fleet down from 833 airframes to fewer than 300 by 1970. The last combat-coded F-105s transferred to Air National Guard units in 1971, where they flew training missions and weekend sorties for another dozen years. Pilots who'd pulled 5Gs over the Red River Valley now flew low-level routes over Nevada at peacetime speeds, the Vulcan loaded with practice rounds, the wings carrying concrete shapes instead of 750-pound Mark 82s. The sound of the J-75 engine at full military power, that particular howl, high-pitched and furious, audible from 6 miles on a clear day, echoed across American airfields well into the 1980s. At Korat, the revetments filled with F-4s, then with nothing at all when the base returned to Thai control. At Takhli, same. The briefing rooms where intelligence officers logged MiG kills and crew chiefs invented golden buffalo stickers hosted different squadrons, different aircraft, and eventually different wars altogether. The tally sheets came down. The tape marks stayed on the walls for years. On the morning after SQ's kill, October 28, 1967, the 355th Tactical Fighter Wing launched 16 Thuds into Route Pack 6 before dawn. Standard package. 4 flights of 4. They hit the Canal des Rapides Bridge northwest of Hanoi, took SA-2 fire on egress, and landed at Takhli with 15 aircraft. One pilot ejected over Laos and rode a helicopter back to base in time for lunch. The afternoon schedule posted by 11 a.m., 8 more sorties, new targets, same airspace, 86,000 sorties, 334 aircraft lost, 27.5 MiG kills, 382 pilots who flew north and never came home. One airplane that did everything it was never designed to do. The next morning, they launched again.